Well, this video I want to talk about an issue that it's kind of interesting in that it's contentious and yet it's never mainstream and it's never really discussed, at least in the mainstream way of things. It's also not really discussed in libertarian circles, and I'm somewhat surprised because the crux of the issue really does weigh heavily on the idea of individual liberty, coercion, assault, and the rights of children. And that is the idea of, or the issue of circumcision, to the extent that it is an issue. Now, this is something that, I'll be honest, has not been, a motivating issue. This hasn't been something that's been really nagging at my mind for a long time, and yet every so often I find myself thinking about it, and whenever I do, I can't help but feel really sad and saddened and almost enraged, except for the fact that there's really nothing I can do about it, so there's nothing I can do about being upset. Most of my subscribers are American. I have quite a few who are not. For those of you who are not, and some of you already know about this, circumcision is very widely practiced in the United States. I think the rates have gone down and they're not uniform across every type of population. It's my understanding that in the Pacific Northwest it's not so common anymore. In fact, there might be, if trends continue, it will become not practiced. However, where I'm from and through much of the country, in my age group, certainly circumcision rates are in the over 90%. I don't remember all the history, but this is a relatively recent phenomenon. This began basically around in the Victorian era. Obviously, Jews have been doing it forever, and at some point in the Victorian era, it became something that was seen as hygienic and upper class. So if you were sophisticated, you got circumcised. I don't know if this is because Jewish doctors, I don't know how this idea got spread. Of course, obviously the Jews didn't invent circumcision either. It's a procedure that is widely, if not totally, practiced around the world. Now, today the ostensive reasons for giving it is hygienic. The idea being that foreskin can cause problems, they can become infected, they can get diseases. That's all true, although it is overstated. It's also true that you can get head lice, but I don't see many people advocating that we shave our heads or our entire bodies for that matter. That would presumably prevent against certain disorders, certain ailments, certain infections that we could get, but it would come at a great cost. I think that circumcision is similar, except it's a lot more damaging than having your hair shaved, at least in my opinion. Part of my more recent revulsion at the idea of the process, and let me say, sometimes it is actually necessary. I mean, sometimes women need to have their breasts amputated, and that's not an issue. And also, it's not an issue with consenting adults. Consenting adults can do whatever they want. I'm one. I don't like piercings and tattoos, and I consider all that stuff to be mutilation, basically. But if people want to self-mutilate, that's their bodies, they have every right to. And if people want to get circumcisions, whether they have a good reason or not, that's irrelevant. But that's not the crux of the issue, because circumcision is done en masse on children. But what really started to get me more incensed about it, I think is a good word, is not just my obvious nocturnal interests, but sort of my philosophy, which I think is kind of evolving as a sort of pan-humanism. And in my thinking and my feeling, humans are amazing, and humans should be allowed to be humans and to thrive in their humanity. That means, talking about and working towards the future. That also means acknowledging and learning from our past, and I mean, like, not just history, but prehistory, paleontology, evolution, all that. And to deny somebody part of their humanity, I think, is the greatest crime that you can commit. Now, there's gradations within that, obviously homicide is the greatest thing that you can deny a person their entire life. But right below that would be maiming, and especially maiming that involves the loss of a body part. So, I mean, probably the most stunning and terrible would be a decapitation, although that would count as homicide, I guess. But, you know, having a finger removed, having a toe, a leg, an arm, a nose, basically any type of mutilation of that sort, I can't think of anything that's worse other than homicide. And it actually makes me really sad to think that I don't know, the part of my humanity is gone from me, and I didn't have a say in it. I didn't even know about it. In fact, I grew up completely unaware of it. Now, like I said, growing up, everybody who I knew was circumcised. It's not a explicitly hygienic thing so much anymore as it's just a cultural, sociological thing. In fact, the #1 reason given by people is that they don't want their children to be unlike other children or unlike other parents. You know, so if the father's circumcised, it stands to reason that the son should be also. At least that's the thinking that many people give. But you know, many people around the world are not circumcised, and there's a whole element of their existence that is just denied me and everyone else who's been circumcised. Now, again, if you want to have it done, that's your business. But that's not anyone denying you. That's you making a choice, which is not the case with most circumcisions, the vast majority. Now, for a long time, intactivists, you know, the people who are virulently against circumcision, I think were hyperbolic and are hyperbolic in their statements. I was just reading the other day, somebody posted that they had just gotten circumcised. I was thinking about doing this video, so I went and checked some threads about it. Somebody posted that they were going to get circumcised. They didn't give a reason. And of course the first responses were, ew, now there's going to be one more ugly penis in the world. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I happen to find uncircumcised penises relatively beautiful most of the time. But that said, there's a whole argument here about pleasure, sensation, nerve endings, and people talk about, well, it's supposed to be like it's supposed to have the softness of the underside of your tongue and blah blah. For those of you who are not circumcised, all this probably comes as very weird speculation about something that to you is so mundane as to not even warrant thought. But for someone like me, it's like, am I missing anything? What am I missing, if so? Now, the intactivists tend to say, oh, okay, if you have sex and if you're circumcised, it's not really sex. That is probably not true, and it's very hard to actually say that. There is no measurement of pleasure. You know, we can count nerve endings all you want. That doesn't prove anything. You know, the visual stimulus between looking at porn and looking at a lump of coal it's the same number of neuron inputs. That doesn't tell you anything about the pleasure or that of reading a good book or, you know, looking at a Picasso or whatever. It's the same neuro inputs. You know, at least from the sensory side, maybe not from the processing side. I'm not a neurologist, so maybe I've just completely butchered all that, but I don't know. The only like testimony that we can have are people who were sexually active and then had their foreskins removed and then continue to be sexually active. Unfortunately, there's two problems with that. One is that, well, that's an individual opinion, that's a subjective evaluation. So you can't really extrapolate a whole too much off of that. And also, usually if they got circumcised in adulthood, there was some reason, and that reason is likely going to color their view. So let's just say, well, when I was in high school, there was one kid in our school that we knew about who was uncircumcised, and he was ostracized for it horribly in the locker room, during gym class at Boy Scouts. Just he was made fun of constantly in nude situations, not like in English class. But now this didn't happen to him, as far as I know. But let's just assume that, you know, growing up, he had such a strong stigma attached to his foreskin that he decided to get it removed. well, then he might very well psychologically report afterwards that there was no difference or that his sex was better or whatever. But it would be really hard to draw any kind of objective, to the extent that that's even a valid word, conclusion from his experience, because it's an individual experience that was very, very much colored by his own personal biases and experiences. And so his testimony it's maybe interesting, but how relevant it is unknown. So, when I have looked and seen, for a long time, most of the ones I said that they couldn't tell a difference. Others said that there was a huge difference. So, I don't know what to make of any of that. But when we come to the more fundamental issue here is, we could debate this all day, but the child that is circumcised without consent doesn't have this debate. It doesn't have the option to have this debate. This is something that is simply done to him, and I've heard stories of this actually being done so routinely that even when parents didn't want it to happen, it did. I believe I saw it in 2020, something like that, where at this hospital, I think this is probably a very common practice, the expectant parents fill out a form basically telling the doctors this is what they want, this is what they don't want. Do they want this type of medication? Do they want anesthesia? Do they want or is there any religious observations they require? All that kind of stuff. And at one point it says, do you want the baby to be circumcised? And there have been cases where parents have checked no, but the doctors are so accustomed to doing it automatically that they did it anyway without even checking. It was almost a formality. Now, granted, the child's not going to remember that when they grow up. Another hyperbolic thing that the Intactivists do is say, oh, it scars the child psychologically for life. How is this measurable? I can't say. I don't know that there's any psychological empirical data that distinguishes between uncut and cut guys that shows that you can find some kind of psychological scar from the cut guys, other than ones that maybe develop later, which is kind of what's happening to me. I hate to say it. I certainly don't actually remember it happening. So, that I don't agree with. But then growing up, it's kind of like, what am I missing from my life? I don't even know. It's not like, and it's not some hypothetical, what if I had magic powers, like I had telekinesis or I was telepathic. It's something that I was born with, and then it was denied me right away. And it's a surgical procedure. It's not like they said some religious poem over my squealing body, and now I'm cursed by the words they spoke. They removed a part of my body, mine and tens of millions of other little boys, hundreds of millions around the entire world. And one has to ask, by what right? This is a fundamental question then of who owns the children? Who owns? Do parents have the right to mutilate their children? And in general, they don't. Like if a parent says, I want you to remove his fingers, doctors would be like, I'm calling the cops, you're going to jail. But it is socially acceptable to do in this case, and that's purely conservative bias. There's no pragmatic reason for this to happen, at least medically. And so I think if the child owns their body, then obviously you need their consent. They can't give their consent, and so nothing can be done in this regard. No surgery can be, unless it's there to save their life, which again is not the case. I mean, you can say, oh, he has a tumor on his foreskin, he's going to die. Okay, fine, cut it off. But like, how? That's an analogy that has no application to almost all cases. It's one of those, your analogy isn't proving anything. It's not illustrating the principle involved at all. It's constructing a whole different scenario that's not really that relevant. And some of you know that I have become interested in this topic to the point where I will ask people, I'm really curious. I'm really curious to know what I was denied and what I'm missing. And I think that it's a shame that this isn't a bigger issue than it is. That this isn't something that people talk about more often. That a fundamental physical part of our being, and the psychological and mental effects of lacking a part of your body for all of your life the ripple effect of that has got to be tremendous. You know, that how your sensory perception of the world is radically altered by this this cut that happens, and maybe it's not as dramatic as losing a hand or being castrated or, you know, losing your breast. I don't know. It's hard to judge, but it's not any different in principle, only in quantity. You know, your fingernails, they'll grow back. You can grow those back. Your hair grows back. Foreskins don't grow back, at least not yet. You know, maybe medical science will get to the point where they can. But even then, you know, one has to wonder, you know, no two foreskins are exactly the same. So even if the science was able to give you one, it's unlikely they were going to give you the one that your genes made for you. And, you know, that's like wearing somebody else's shoes as far as I'm concerned. It's better than being barefoot, maybe, as long as they fit. That would be bad if they didn't fit. I would assume. I don't know. People, uncut guys, can tell me different, I guess. But it's more off topic than not for libertarians. But there's some fundamental principle in there. You know, and this is the same way I feel about abortion. The idea, you know, is so severe when we're talking about homicide and infringing on other people's rights, that the burden of proof has to be on the aggressor. It has to be on the person who's potentially infringing on someone else. Now, again, I'm not settling the debate. I'm not saying that there's no plausible way that a fetus could never be considered something other than human and hence not be homicide. I'm not saying that's impossible, but as far as I can tell, that's the best argument. And if someone wants to argue for abortion, then from my point of view, the onus is on them to show that that is not homicide, because that's damn sure what it looks like to me. And it's one of those things where you don't want to be iffy about. You know, if we're talking about homicide, we don't want to be iffy. And if we're talking about mutilation, we don't want to be iffy. You know, we don't want a plastic surgeon to not know whether the person he's operating on really wants the surgery or not. There has to be no doubt. If the person is given consent, there's no problem. It's a little bit ethically more complicated, but much more debatable, and certainly not as revolting as if the person can't give their consent, but there's some kind of pressing quote-unquote need. You know, he's unconscious, but he needs a medical procedure. Okay, maybe there's some wiggle room. But this is not the case with circumcision. So it doesn't meet these criteria. So I think it's outrageous, and I've become increasingly feel that way. Which is not my, you know, my initial views on the subject were conservative. I was circumcised. Most of the people I know are circumcised. It's apple pie, American fine. And anybody who's against it is just being some radical hippie. That's why I'm calling this a reluctant intactivist. You know, it was not my initial reaction to the topic, but that is where I have moved over the years, and you know, I don't see myself changing my mind all that much. So sorry if some of you were grossed out by this. I know this is my normal fare. I really felt compelled to talk about this. Like, I'm gonna upload this later. I'm at work right now, and I won't be able to upload for at least another week. So I'm recording this on May 25th. If it gives any idea, it's a beautiful day out. Sitting here in my work trailer. Not a lot to do today, hence my ability to record videos. But this just is really getting me down sometimes, not all the time. But like, what am I missing? I'll never know. And that's, to me, something of a crime. You know, but who do I blame? My parents? The doctors? You know, for them it was not even like, it was the most throwaway non-decision that they could make. You know, and it's like, oh. And even if I was to consider it a criminal act, what restitution could I possibly receive? You know, there's nothing that could make things the way that they were or would have ended up being had this not happened. You know, normally, you know, if someone chops off my leg and I lose my job, I can say, look, you know, my income was destroyed. I can't drive, and I can't do all these things, and it'd be millions and millions of dollars, and rightfully so. You know, and here we're talking about And if it happened when I was 75, it's not going to be as much money as if it happened when I was 20 or 15. And now we're talking about something that happens when you're 0. Or, you know, D-Day, B-Day plus 10 or whatever, whatever the average time is. You know, I don't know. I think what it's going to take is a lot of people changing their mind. It wouldn't hurt, although I don't think it would ever happen and wouldn't be enough in and of itself for somebody to actually successfully litigate this. Now, that doesn't happen if the parents gave consent, unfortunately, but if that were to happen, how children are treated by their parents would change quite a bit, which would be as radical as it would be important. So, all right, that's it. I'm not saying here that I think anti-circumcision will end the government or anything. That's not my point. I don't think circumcision is a government plot to desensitize men. I mean, maybe, I'm sure there are intactivists. I'm sure the libertarian intactivists out there might come up with that idea, and maybe there's something to it. Although I don't see any added docility to uncut men, or relative to cut men, or vice versa. I'm sorry. So anyway, that's it. I'll talk to y'all later.